Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a video to discuss the recent AMA that was done just finished up like about an hour ago on Reddit, and I didn't actually know about this until it was posted on the forums. I don't really follow Reddit too closely, so I kind of missed out on it. But there was quite a few good questions asked. It did take place now on the 7th of August here. There was quite a few good questions asked. Went straight to the developers, as you can see here. There was a handful of other related questions as well. They were answered by Rich and Mitch from CA. And at first I wasn't even sure if I was going to do this video, but honestly I think there was a lot of content, there was a lot of questions, a lot of posts to sort of sift through. Not all of them ended up getting answered in the AMA. But I did read through the whole thing, and I figured some of you guys might appreciate a sort of rundown or shortened version, or I figured I'd also share my thoughts on the matter and sort of share what I think about what we sort of gleaned from the AMA. Now, it's a bit of a mess. I'm not going to be going through and sort of highlighting every single point here because, quite frankly, there's no good way to organize the posts here, and to touch on everything and to sort of display it visually. So I'm not really going to be scrolling through this like a list. There's just no way of really doing that. What I will sort of do is just run through the points. I read through the whole thing and just sort of touch on the main points that I saw. A lot of the questions, of course, were repetitive or were repeats because a lot of people want to see the same things or are interested in knowing the same things. So I'm going to try to narrow things down as much as I can. First and foremost, on the issue of patches and bug fixes, I know a lot of people were curious about if now bug fixes and patches are going to be limited to just to simply major releases with DLCs, and there was a lot of concern about that. So apparently that is not entirely going to be the case. Apparently there's a bit of a logistical issue with that. But there will be a patch supposedly coming up shortly. A beta PTR apparently is going to be released, I think, or beta test is going to be released shortly. That is supposed to fix the reinforcement bug, which has been plaguing the game. In case you do not know, in a campaign, oftentimes you'll position your army one way, and it'll come out on a side of the field that you did not expect. It's most glaring when you're doing a siege battle, for example. You sally out, and your reinforcing army, the one that's coming out from the city, is coming out on the opposite side of the enemy army. And I've seen this multiple times. It's a major error, and it's one that's been going on plaguing the game for quite a few months now. But supposedly that's supposed to be fixed, and from what CA was saying here, and from what the reps were saying here, that should hopefully be fixed in a sort of minor bug patch that's supposed to be coming out hopefully shortly, or at least the beta for it is. Then of course there's the actual issue of what new content, what reworks, and that sort of stuff. And of course that's the more exciting stuff. So I just wanted to touch on that bug fix thing first and foremost because I figured that's kind of boring and might as well get it out of the way. But quickly going over what I saw, there wasn't much exact detail. Obviously they don't want to be spoiling anything. They don't want to be sharing too much. I guess they can't really share too much. There might still be stuff in planning, whatever. But there was, I think, a little bit more concrete information on what we can expect from this year and from the upcoming DLC. Obviously, Warhammer 3 completely separate from this. That's a different team, and they didn't really cover that at all. But of course, we still do have a campaign pack coming on, and that is supposed to be, based on the information we've had from Grace thus far, that's supposed to be about four new lords. Because it is supposed to be bigger than a race pack, so 4 new lords and new campaign mechanics and all that sort of stuff. Because I do believe in the previous, so that's supposed to be coming out sometime later this year. Given that it's already August, my assumption would be that it is going to be October, November, maybe. That would be my anticipated sort of release date, especially because I'm kind of expecting the release for the Lizardmen and Skaven DLC to be sometime early next year. My anticipation will be that early to mid-fall of this year is when we should see this faction pack. And of course, that's still a mystery. However, they didn't discount in this. It was interesting here. They did not discount any non-rulebook factions. So there's a good chance it could be a non-rulebook faction. It's kind of what we expected before, but they were saying that they're willing to go outside of 8th edition and outside of for material, which they've already done before to an extent with the monster units from the Monstrous Arcanum, which were used for Norska, but it's a little more concrete information now. We know that they might go back for additional inspiration, for additional units, for potentially additional factions, to go back to earlier releases of Warhammer Fantasy, which is good. That means there's potential for a lot of units that we have or a lot of factions that haven't really had a presence, but at one point were sort of developed. For example, Araby, Kislev, those sorts of factions at one point had some sort of decent roster, and Dogs of War, of course, are a big one. And so that definitely gives me hope. There was also some people asked directly, of course, if these factions are coming, and while there was no straight answer, there was a lot of maybes and sort of a little bit of speculation that could be done. What was a little more encouraging for me and a little more concrete, I think, was the promise that a lot of the old factions are going to be looked at. According to, I forget if it was Mitch or Rich who was covering this, was mentioning that one of the mechanics they want to go back and look at was the Amber mechanic for the Wood Elves and potentially rework it. As well as looking back at the old factions and potentially releasing some of the missing units, some of the missing lords that people are still sort of clamoring for and asking for, which is for me encouraging. And supposedly one of these old factions is supposed to get reworked alongside this thus far secretive campaign pack. So I'm hoping personally for Greenskins or Empire to get the rework based on, once again, I forget who says what because it was a little back and forth and a little bit messy, but one of the factions they definitely did want to look at apparently was Empire, but it looks like there's going to be a rework of one of these factions. And given that currently we kind of know which factions are the most beat up or most sort of lacking, Empire, Greenskins, Beastmen are probably in the worst state relative to everybody else. Norska kind of got a big update when it was released. Bretonnia and Dwarves have already gotten a bit of a rework. And Vampire Counts, Chaos, and Wood Elves are in a reasonably strong position as is. However, there was also mention of wanting to rework the Amber mechanic and potentially add more legendary lords to the elves. Now, there's no to the Wood Elves, so there's no guarantees. Of course, a lot of this is speculative. A lot of these answers were not direct. Yes, we will do this, but people were asking, of course, if there's going to be more legendary lords or reworks. And the Wood Elves, supposedly, one of the things they do want to look at is reworking the Amber mechanics for the Wood Elves, and potentially adding them giving them an additional legendary lord or giving them more options, which currently they're kind of limited on. They've only got Orion and Durthu, who are great. They're very strong, but they basically start in the same spot. They kind of, and that's it. It's their only legendary lord options. But that was definitely cool to see that the Wood Elves might get some looking into. Of course, so many questions about missing units, and like I said, that apparently they do want to try to fit at least some of these units in. And add a lot of these and flesh out the game as much as they can. Now, what they mean by this, of course, there was nothing exact. They were very, I think, adamant in their wording that the focus is Warhammer 2 factions, first and foremost, on trying to flesh those out as much as possible. However, Warhammer 1 factions are not going to be ignored, and they're going to be continuously updated and improved as well. So definitely a little bit of encouraging news there. Definitely we can hope to see at least the most downtrodden factions of Warhammer 1 get some improvements, I think. Supposedly Grimgor and some of those underperforming lords are supposed to get buffs. Grimgor, if you don't know, is currently probably one of the worst lords in Quick Match. I personally use him sometimes in some niche matchups, but I don't think he's the strongest option by any means. He's more for fun. And Grimgor, for example, is definitely the sort of the archetype of a bad lord right now. And as far as straight up combat capability goes, and so he's supposedly supposed to be improved alongside some other underperforming lords, which went unmentioned. So that was interesting to see. That hopefully we will see these buffs. We will get to see these improvements. Like I said, a lot of these answers were a bit indirect. They were a bit limited and not necessarily not necessarily the most direct necessarily, I suppose. There was some talk of reworking skills to make them more to make Old World Lord skills a little more powerful. Of course, there's a new a new skill layout for army skills in Total War Warhammer 2 than what there was in Warhammer 1. Which is arguably better designed because it lets you, in Warhammer 2, it definitely lets you customize more to what units you want to be building, whereas in Warhammer 1, you kind of got shafted. You'd often be forced to invest skill points in units you didn't care for and would never use in late game, or didn't really want to be using in late game, and it was kind of a waste, and it was kind of badly designed in a sense that way. So hopefully that's something that is going to be changed, and it's definitely something the devs were saying they would look into. As you can see, if we quickly scroll down, you can see a lot of these questions are focusing on units and that sort of stuff. It was not discounted whether or not we will see sort of further legendary lords, of course, for those factions. As you can see here, there was a question about Grom and Grom coming out, and apparently we might get to see at some point some additional Warhammer 1 Legendary Lords, outside of, say, Wood Elves, which I already mentioned was a possibility. A final little note, I suppose, is that we are supposedly landmarks and new regions might be added in upcoming patches, including new Skaven regions, perhaps once the Skaven DLC drop, or Skaven and Lizardman DLC drops. Which is cool. We'll hopefully see new, apparently, hopefully buffing of landmarks that are underperforming. Hopefully, new regions added to the game to potentially spice things up or mix things up. There was no specifics given, but that was one of those cool things that affects campaign, obviously only, but it still could be fun. It could spice things up and definitely, hopefully, make things a little more fun. So, to quickly recap from what we've gleaned from here, bug fixes are apparently going to stay largely tied to major releases, but small bug fixes and patches apparently will continue happening separately, with one supposedly being on the way in a fairly short period of time. We're supposed to get a beta for it, though it's just a bug fix, not, as far as I know, any sort of balance or an rework or anything like that. We can expect a major release of a campaign pack by the end of this year. This has already been common knowledge. Based on the information we know already, it's probably going to be for new starting positions, some new campaign mechanics. Hopefully, quite probably, factions that don't exist in tabletop, though we will obviously see. But these are supposed to come alongside Warhammer 1 updates, and apparently the Warhammer 1 factions, that's really the main thing to glean here, is that the Warhammer 1 factions are not abandoned, and apparently they're going to keep getting some love and keep getting improved and reworked. Similarly, some units that are still missing from Warhammer 2 factions that people are worried about might still make an appearance. Once again, there was a lot of maybes and a lot of we're looking into it, so no guarantees, but apparently a lot of the Warhammer 1 might see some improvements. A lot of the underperforming lords are apparently still going to see some improvements. Supposedly, they are looking into Boris and the Red Duke, who are, of course, very popular legendary lords, and ones people keep clamoring for. And Boris is supposed to get his Griffin come, I think, next major patch. I think he's supposed to get his Griffin mount, which he gets in multiplayer, but he does not get in campaign. In campaign, he's stuck on a horse, which kind of sucks. But definitely more love hopefully coming in for Warhammer 1 factions, more reworks potentially. We will get a Warhammer 1 rework with the release of the next major DLC. So that was the main sort of thing I think to glean from, is that Warhammer 1's not abandoned, or the Warhammer 1 and the Old World factions are not completely abandoned, and we will continue seeing improvements made to them. Otherwise, focus continues on Warhammer 2. Supposedly we're still supposed to get a good chunk of content. There was also some mention, I think this would be one more thing worth mentioning, is that it looks like they are looking into some lords that, for Warhammer 2 especially, because it looked like they were going for a 4-lord per faction sort of system. But apparently there is some looking into additional lords or additional characters or heroes and legendary heroes and such that could still function as lords. The legendary heroes were touched upon, though from what I gleaned, they are not trying to implement them as heroes, because apparently the way it was described is that the assets, especially voice acting and models, would be overly costly for the result, or for the sort of for the investment will be too great, essentially, for the reward to make legendary heroes. But we might still see some. Apparently, they are looking into the possibility of making some of them as legendary lords. So that's interesting, both from the perspective of Warhammer 1 factions, who might still get more legendary lords, but also from Warhammer 2 factions, where there's been a lot of speculation about what Skaven might, especially Skaven, who have bajillion lords, but also High Elves to an extent, who have Eltharion and stuff like that, that these factions might get some more additional love in the future, and we might actually see more lords than the current 4 per faction rule that's enforced for everybody except vampire counts. But yeah, I do apologize if this was a little ranty, if this was a little running on. I'll keep tabs on the page and see if there's any. There were quite a few factions that or quite a few questions that went unanswered. If they are answered tomorrow, I don't know if they will be. The AMA was supposed to just be today. As far as I'm aware, there are no more questions being asked. You can see here I was checking in, seeing if there was any additional updates. But as far as I could see, there were none. No further ones than about an hour ago at this point. So yeah, I'll keep tabs. I'll see if there's additional questions answered. I'll be sure to let you guys know and hopefully touch on it a little bit. But I do hope this sort of summed up the AMA for you guys. If you were hoping not to have to scroll through a bajillion pages or through a bajillion comments worth, it's like 1,000 comments right now of Reddit, then there you have it. I do hope you guys found it informative. I do apologize if it's a bit ranty, and if there's a lot of maybes and possiblies, and we'll look into it. That is kind of the gist of the Reddit. There was very little guaranteed, but there's a lot for speculation and a lot for discussion. So I really wanted to touch on it, and I really wanted to discuss it with you guys and open it up to all of you. And yeah, thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below to keep up with additional content. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, anything like that, shoot, go ahead, post down. I can't say I'll have much information to give on this topic here, but yeah, be sure to ask you. And if you want to discuss or have your own thoughts on the possibilities, yeah, be sure to post. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching once again, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.